The station was a river of noise and motion, a place people moved through, not a place anyone stayed. The air smelled of fast food, exhaust from the buses rumbling outside, and the sharp tang of cleaning solution. Voices blended into a steady, meaningless hum announcements for delayed trains, the chatter of commuters, the crying of a tired child. Everyone was in a hurry, eyes glued to phones or fixed on the distance, their minds already at their destination. In the middle of all this, right between a newsstand and a row of hard plastic seats, sat the piano. It was an old upright, painted a cheerful, chipping blue. A sign on it read, "Play me, I'm yours." It was a nice idea, Leo thought. A little splash of color and culture in the gray, rushing world. He passed it every Tuesday and Thursday evening on his way to a coaching session with a vocalist across town. Leo was a pianist himself, not the kind who played in train stations. He played in concert halls with good acoustics, where people sat quietly and listened. He practiced scales for hours in a room with soundproofing. The public piano to him was usually a source of mild pain. He'd heard a lot of things from it. The plunking, one-finger melodies of kids whose parents urged them to try. The hesitant, stumbling attempts at chopsticks or heart and soul. Sometimes, someone brave would try a pop song, getting the chords mostly right. The singing voice drowned out by the arriving 7:15 express. He appreciated the idea, truly. But to his trained ear, it was often like watching someone try to perform surgery with a spoon. Well-meaning, but hard to witness. It was on one of these Thursday evenings that he first really saw the man. Leo was running a few minutes early, so he stopped to buy a bottle of water. As he twisted the cap off, he leaned against a pillar, watching the human traffic flow. The man was sitting on the bench by the piano, but he wasn't playing. He was just sitting there, a still point in the moving crowd. He wore a heavy brown coat that was too warm for the season, stained and worn thin at the elbows. A faded green backpack, lumpy and full, rested at his feet. His hair was gray and long, tied back messily. His face was lined, not just with age, but with a kind of deep weariness. The skin weathered like old leather. Leo had seen him before. He realized this man was part of the station's furniture. The regulars, the woman who sold newspapers, the security guard with a kind smile, and this man who sometimes sat on a different bench, just watching. People walked past him without seeing him, a ripple flowing around a stone in a stream. They called him names Leo had overheard, not to his face, but in that way people do. The station ghost, old Bob. Nothing meant with real cruelty, just the casual shorthand of a busy world. Today, the man was looking at the piano keys. He wasn't touching them. He was just looking, his hands resting in his lap. His gaze was intense, focused, as if he were reading tiny print on the black and white tiles. Leo took a sip of water. Go on then, he thought, a familiar, resigned feeling settling in. Let's get it over with. He expected the man to maybe press a single key, or slap both palms down for a loud, jarring bang. Another station noise to add to the rest. A teenager with a skateboard whizzed by, laughing loudly. The sound seemed to break the man's trance. He slowly, very slowly, lifted his right hand. It was a rough hand, the nails chipped and dirty. He held it over the middle of the keyboard, hovering. Leo braced himself. The hand descended, but it didn't crash. It didn't plink. One finger, the index finger, pressed down on a single key. A clean, clear C note rang out. It was a simple sound, but it was played with a perfect, gentle touch. The note hung in the air for a second, pure and round, before getting swallowed by the noise of a suitcase rolling over tile. Leo's eyebrow went up a fraction. A fluke. Anyone can hit one key. The man's hand didn't retreat. It shifted, and now 3 fingers came down together. Not a fist, but the pads of 3 fingers, forming a chord. An E minor. It was a sad, beautiful sound. It wasn't loud, but it had a weight to it. A woman talking on her phone nearby paused for a half-second, glanced over, then kept walking. Now the left hand joined. It settled low on the keyboard and played a deep, rolling bass note that seemed to vibrate in Leo's chest. Then something happened. The man's shoulders, which had been hunched and tense, dropped. A change came over his body. His spine seemed to straighten just a little, not with pride, but with a different kind of awareness. His right hand moved again. It wasn't the stiff, poking motion Leo expected. It flowed. 4 notes, then 5. A little ripple of sound that was neither a song nor an exercise. It was a thought. A musical thought. The notes connected to each other. They had a relationship. They were searching for something. Leo stopped drinking his water. He stood up straighter, letting the crowd bump past him. His musician's brain, always analyzing, kicked in. That turn of phrase. It was oddly sophisticated. It resolved in an unusual way. It wasn't random. The man stopped suddenly, pulling his hands back into his lap as if the keys had grown hot. He stared straight ahead, the distant look back in his eyes. The moment was over. A man in a business suit, not looking, dropped a $1 coin into the hat that was sitting on the piano's lid. The clink of the coin was a harsh, metallic sound next to the memory of those notes. The homeless man didn't acknowledge the money. He didn't seem to see the suit. He just sat, receding back into his stillness. Leo looked at his watch. He was going to be late. He pushed off the pillar and began to weave through the crowd toward the east exit. But his mind wasn't on his upcoming session. It was stuck back at the blue piano. What was that? It wasn't the joke he'd been expecting. It wasn't the clumsy, funny attempt that would make him shake his head and smile. It was something else. A fragment of something. Complete. Like hearing someone speak a single, perfectly grammatical sentence in a language you thought they didn't know. It was confusing. It didn't fit the story. The man in the worn coat was supposed to be part of the background noise, not someone who could produce a sound that made Leo's professional ear twitch. Maybe it was a fluke. A strange, random grouping of notes that just happened to sound interesting. He stepped out into the cool evening air, but the noise of the city felt louder than the quiet, searching music now stuck in his head. He had dismissed it as a joke before a note was even played. Now he felt a prick of something uncomfortable, not quite shame, but a sense that he had looked at a book and judged it entirely by its torn and dirty cover. As he walked to his rehearsal, the flawless, repetitive scales he would play there already seemed less interesting than those few, imperfect, but strangely alive notes from the station. He knew, without wanting to admit it, that on Tuesday he would be watching that piano again. Not just passing by, watching. For the next few days, the music wouldn't leave Leo alone. It was just a few seconds of sound, but it played in his head at odd moments. While he was boiling water for tea, he heard that little ripple of notes. Lying in bed before sleep, the quiet, sad chord returned. It was like a splinter in his mind, a tiny piece of something that didn't belong. He told himself it was nothing. The man had probably heard something like it on the radio, and his fingers had just remembered by accident. Muscle memory from some long-forgotten childhood lesson. That had to be it. But on Tuesday, Leo found himself leaving his apartment 10 minutes earlier than usual. He didn't admit to himself why. The station was just as busy, the same river of people flowing toward trains and buses. His eyes went straight to the blue piano. It was being played by a young couple, laughing as they tried to play a duet, each of them using one hand. It was sweet and clumsy. Leo stood by his usual pillar, pretending to check his phone, and waited. The couple finished with a dramatic wrong chord and walked away giggling. The piano sat empty. Minutes passed. Leo began to feel foolish. What was he doing, standing around like this? He was a professional musician, not some curious kid. He was about to leave when he saw the brown coat moving through the crowd. The man walked slowly, with a slight stoop, as if carrying something heavy no one could see. He reached the piano bench and sat down with the same careful motion. He didn't look at the people around him. He placed his worn backpack between his feet, his hands returning to his lap. He just stared at the keys. Motionless. Leo held his breath. He felt a strange tension, like waiting for a shy animal to come out into the open. He noticed details now. The man's hands, resting on his knees, were long-fingered. The way he held them wasn't tense or curled. They were relaxed, poised. They were a pianist's hands, under the grime. This time, the man began with his left hand alone. A low, walking bass line started, a simple pattern. It was steady, a heartbeat. Then his right hand lifted and came down, not with a single note, but with a full, rich chord that made Leo's spine straighten. It was jazz. Not the simple kind, but the complex, harmony-shifting kind. The right hand began to dance over the keys, weaving a melody that was both playful and deeply lonely. It flirted with the steady bass, then ran away from it, always finding its way back. This was no accident. This was a conversation. One hand talking to the other. A small crowd began to gather. Not a big one, but a few people paused, their hurried trips interrupted. A delivery man stopped with his dolly. A mother with a stroller slowed to a halt. They didn't clap or cheer. They just listened, their faces softening from the hard, closed look of people on a mission. The music shifted again. The jazz melody faded, and the man's right hand played a series of achingly beautiful singing notes. They rose and fell like a voice. Leo recognized it, or thought he did. It was a piece by Chopin, a nocturne. But it wasn't the whole piece. It was a fragment, the most heartbreaking part of the melody, repeated and turned over like a precious stone in the hand. Then, as if a cloud passed over the sun, the music darkened. The man's left hand crashed down in a low, dissonant chord, and the beautiful melody broke apart into sharp, jarring clusters of sound. It was ugly and frightening. The people in the small crowd flinched. The mother with the stroller quickly moved on. The man's hands froze. The frightening sound hung in the air. He pulled them back into his lap, bowing his head. The spell was broken. The remaining listeners shuffled away, a few dropping coins into the hat. The sound of money hitting the felt was loud in the sudden quiet. Leo stood frozen by his pillar. His heart was beating fast. What had he just witnessed? That wasn't just someone playing music. That was someone feeling something. Right there, channeling it directly into the keys. The beauty, then the sudden storm of noise. It was emotional. It was raw. It was more real than any perfect performance Leo had given in a silent hall. He watched the man sit there, head bowed, for a full 5 minutes. He wasn't collecting the money. He wasn't looking for applause. He was just recovering, like someone after a physical effort. Finally, he stood up, picked up his backpack, and melted back into the crowd, heading toward the darker, quieter end of the station. Leo's mind was racing. The last bit, the crashing, ugly part, that hadn't been Chopin. That had been something else. Something from inside. The contrast was terrifying and fascinating. On Thursday, Leo was there again. This time, he bought a coffee he didn't really want and took a seat on the hard plastic chairs, a little closer. He felt like a detective, or a scientist observing a rare bird. He knew it was strange, but he couldn't stop. The man arrived at his usual time. He went through the same ritual, sitting, staring, hands in lap. Today, he started with something different. It was a simple, classical-sounding exercise, scales, but turned into a delicate, twirling pattern. His fingers, despite their rough appearance, were incredibly agile. They flew over the keys with a lightness that seemed impossible for someone who looked so weighed down by life. Then, a group of loud teenagers wandered over. One of them, a boy in a bright red hoodie, called out, "Hey, play something we know. Play some TV theme song or something." The man didn't look up. He didn't smile or acknowledge the request. But his hands shifted on the keyboard. The twirling pattern stopped. He placed his hands in a wide, firm position, took a slow, deep breath that Leo could see from where he sat, and began. The first notes were powerful, deliberate, and deep. They rang out like bells in a tower. Asterisk bang. Bang, bang. Then a torrent of notes followed, a cascading waterfall of sound that was full of fury and sorrow and majesty, all at once. It wasn't a TV theme. It was Rachmaninoff, one of the famous preludes. And he wasn't just playing the notes. He was tearing them from the piano, making the old instrument shake. The loud teenagers fell completely silent, their mouths slightly open. Every conversation in a 20-foot radius stopped. People turned. They came closer. Leo felt the hair on his arms stand up. He knew this piece. He had practiced it for months and still struggled with the powerful, rolling chords in the left hand. This man, on an out-of-tune public piano, with the world rushing around him, was playing it not just perfectly, but with a passion that made Leo's own performances feel like careful copies. The music was huge. It filled the vast station, bouncing off the high ceiling, drowning out the announcements. For 3 minutes, no one moved. They were pinned in place by the sound. When the final crashing chords echoed away into silence, there was a pause. Then real, spontaneous applause broke out. Not just the clinking of coins, but real hands clapping. A dozen people were gathered now, their faces amazed. The man did not smile. He did not bow. He looked almost confused by the sound, flinching slightly at the noise of the clapping. He gave a small, quick nod, his eyes on the ground, scooped the few bills and coins from his hat into his coat pocket, and hurried away, disappearing into a side corridor before anyone could speak to him. Leo remained seated, his cold coffee forgotten in his hand. The applause died down. The crowd dispersed, buzzing with the unexpected thrill of it. Someone said, "Wow, he should be on a stage somewhere." But Leo was thinking something else. He was thinking about the man's flinch at the applause. He was thinking about the 3 different modes he'd seen, the searching jazz, the broken pieces of Chopin, and this thunderous, technically monstrous Rachmaninoff. This wasn't a street performer. A street performer played crowd pleasers. A street performer smiled and passed the hat. This was someone hiding in plain sight. This was a musician who had lived inside music, deeply and seriously, and who now seemed to use this public piano as the only way to let it out, in confused, brilliant, and sometimes painful fragments. The station wasn't his stage. It was his confessional. Leo's curiosity had burned away, replaced by a solid, heavy certainty. This was real, and it was a tragedy playing out daily, unnoticed, to the soundtrack of shuffling feet and rolling suitcases. He knew, with a conviction that surprised him, that he couldn't just keep watching. He had to know the story. He had to speak to him. The thought filled him with a nervous dread, but it was stronger than the urge to walk away. The mystery was no longer about the music. It was about the man. The decision to actually talk to the man felt huge and terrifying. For a week, Leo didn't do it. He went to the station, he watched, he listened, but he couldn't find the right moment, or more honestly, the right words. "What do you say?" "Excuse me, you play beautifully for someone who lives in a train station?" Every approach he imagined in his head sounded insulting, condescending, or just plain stupid. So he observed. He learned the man's rhythms. He arrived most days just after 5 o'clock. He never played for more than 15, maybe 20 minutes. He never asked for money, just let the hat sit there. He never, ever made eye contact with his audience. After playing, he would often sit for a long time, just staring at the keys or off into the middle distance, before gathering his things and walking toward the old, seldom used west exit, the one that led to the quieter, more industrial part of town. Leo also started to notice the reactions of the other station regulars. The woman at the newsstand would sometimes nod gently in his direction when he played something soft. The security guard, a big man with a calm face, would often linger nearby during the performances, not to shoo him away, but almost as if standing guard, making sure the musician wasn't disturbed. These people, who saw him every day, had a kind of silent understanding. They didn't treat him as a spectacle. They treated him as a fragile, valued part of the ecosystem. One afternoon, the rain was sheeting down outside, drumming on the station's roof. The place was even more crowded than usual, damp and grumpy. The man was playing something quiet and improvisational, notes falling like the rain itself. A businessman, phone pressed to his ear, talking loudly about quarterly reports, walked right past the piano and, without breaking his conversation, dropped a $5 bill into the hat. It was a gesture so automatic, so empty, it felt worse than giving nothing at all. It was a transaction. "I pay you to be the background music to my important life." The man's playing didn't falter. But as the businessman walked away, Leo saw the musician's eyes flicker to the money. Then away, a look of such profound disconnection on his face. He wasn't a performer. He was a man having a private moment in public, and the world kept mistaking it for a show. That was the moment Leo knew he had to try. He couldn't be another person throwing money into the void. He had to acknowledge the person. The next day, he prepared. He bought 2 paper cups of good tea from the station cafe, not coffee. Tea felt less hurried, more gentle. His heart was hammering against his ribs. It felt more intimidating than walking onto a stage for a solo. The man finished a piece, a snippet of something by Batch, played with mathematical clarity, and fell into his usual post-playing stillness, hands in his lap. This was the window. Before the crowd could disperse or anyone else could approach, Leo walked over. He didn't walk straight at him. He approached at an angle slowly, so as not to startle. He stopped a few feet from the piano bench and simply said, "That was very beautiful." The man didn't look up. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if swatting away a fly. Leo took another breath. "The way you voiced the left hand in that Batch. It's not easy to make it sing like that on this piano." This time, the man's head turned a fraction. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, glanced up at Leo, then quickly down at the keys. It wasn't much, but it was contact. He had used the language of the craft, and the man had understood. Leo held out one of the cups of tea. "I brought you some tea. It's just plain. Nothing in it." There was a long pause. The sounds of the station rushed in. A baby crying, the squeal of train brakes. The man looked at the cup, then at Leo's face, searching for something mockery, pity, a trick. Slowly, he reached out and took the cup. His fingers brushed Leo's, and they were cold. He held the warm cup in both hands, not drinking, just absorbing the heat. "Thank you," he said. The voice was low, soft, and clearer than Leo expected. It had a quiet, educated tone, no trace of the rough growl he'd imagined. "I'm a pianist, too," Leo said, keeping his own voice soft. He didn't sit down. not wanting to invade his space. I play with the city orchestra sometimes. Chamber groups. I practice for hours every day. But I heard you last week play the Rachmaninoff Prelude, and it made me stop in my tracks. The man took a small sip of tea. It's an old friend, he murmured, almost to himself. It sounded like it, Leo said. He decided to take a risk. You didn't learn that here. Where did you study? The man was silent for so long Leo thought he wouldn't answer. He stared into his tea. When he spoke, the words were simple, but they landed on Leo with the weight of stones. The Curtis Institute. In Philadelphia. A long, long time ago. Leo felt the air leave his lungs. Curtis. It was one of the most exclusive music schools on the planet. It was a name whispered with reverence. You didn't just apply to Curtis. You were a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation talent, and even then you might not get in. It was a temple. And this man, holding a paper cup of tea with dirty hands, had been inside. Curtis, Leo repeated, the word feeling strange in his mouth. He couldn't reconcile it. The worn coat, the station, the fragmented playing in Curtis. The pieces of the puzzle were now so contradictory, they didn't seem to belong to the same picture. The man nodded, a short, sharp motion. I started when I was 16. They said I had a gift. He said the word gift, like it was a disease. What? Leo hesitated. What happened? The man looked up, and this time his eyes held Leo's. They were full of a pain so old and deep, it was like looking into a well with no bottom. The music. It started to change, he said slowly. In my head. It would be beautiful, and then it would twist. It would get loud in wrong ways. The notes would argue with each other. I couldn't make them stop. I couldn't practice. I couldn't sleep. The sounds in the hall, the rustling, the breathing. It became noise. Terrible noise. He took another sip of tea, his hand trembling slightly. They called it schizophrenia. They gave me medicines. The medicines made the noise quieter, but they also made the music flat, like cloth over the strings. I couldn't feel it anymore. I chose the noise. The story was told in these bare, brutal sentences. Each one was a world of loss. The promise, the diagnosis, the impossible choice between sanity and art, between being functional and being yourself. My family, the man continued, looking away again. They tried. For years. But it is. A lot. For everyone. I became a lot. I left. It was easier. For them. He said this not with self-pity, but with a sad, simple acceptance, as if stating a fact of nature. The wind blows, the rain falls, families break under the weight of an illness. Leo didn't know what to say. I'm so sorry. The words felt useless. The man shrugged, a small movement of the heavy coat. This piano. It's out of tune. The noises of the people, the trains. They're already here. They're part of it. I can play with the noise here. In a quiet room, the noise is only in my head. That is harder. Leo understood now. The station wasn't his stage or his confessional. It was his shield. The chaos of the outside world mirrored and muffled the chaos within, letting the true music find a narrow path through. Do you? Do you have a place to stay? Leo asked, knowing the answer, but needing to hear it. I have places, the man said vaguely. The city is big. I manage. The security guard walked by on his rounds. He caught Leo's eye and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod of approval. He had been watching, making sure this stranger wasn't bothering one of his station's own. What's your name? Leo asked. The man thought about it, as if trying to remember. Finn, he said finally. People here call me Finn. "I'm Leo," he said. "Would it be okay if I sat and listened sometimes? Not just from over there." Finn looked at him for another long moment, then gave that small, sharp nod again. "You brought tea," he said, as if that were a sufficient password. "You can sit." He didn't say anything else. He finished his tea, placed the empty cup carefully on the ground by the piano leg, and stood up. The audience was over. He picked up his backpack and walked away toward the west exit. Leo stood by the blue piano, the cold cup of his own untouched tea in his hand. He felt like he'd been let into a secret, sacred, and terribly sad room. The man had a name, Finn. He had a history, a prodigy from Curtis. He had a reason, a mind that betrayed him, a choice that exiled him. It was no longer a mystery to be solved. It was a person to be acknowledged. And Leo had no idea what to do next, only that walking away for good was now impossible. Knowing Finn's story didn't make things easier for Leo. It made them heavier. Before, he had been curious. Now, he felt responsible in a way he couldn't define. He couldn't just walk past the blue piano any more without a knot tightening in his stomach. He started bringing tea every Tuesday and Thursday. Sometimes Finn would be there, sometimes not. When he was, Leo would hand him the cup, give a small nod, and sit on a bench a polite distance away. He wouldn't speak unless Finn spoke first. He just listened. It became a strange, quiet ritual. Finn began to play longer pieces when Leo was there. Not full sonatas, but longer, more connected passages. It was as if having one steady, quiet listener gave the music a permission it didn't have with the shifting, anonymous crowd. One afternoon, he played for nearly half an hour straight, moving from a melancholic piece by Schubert into a complex, rolling improvisation that seemed to tell a wordless story of traveling through storms and finding moments of calm sunlight. When he finished, his forehead was damp with sweat. He looked over at Leo. "You practice every day?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Yes," Leo said. 3-4 hours usually. More if there's a concert. Finn looked at his own hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. The discipline. I lost that. The hours. The repetition. It became a prison. But the music, it never left. It just lives in here now, he said, tapping the side of his head gently. In pieces. It comes out in pieces. The pieces are beautiful, Leo said, and he meant it. They were more alive, more raw than any technically perfect recital he'd heard in years. Finn gave a faint, sad smile. It was the first time Leo had seen anything close to a smile on his face. "Broken glass can still catch the light," he said quietly. Leo knew he had to do more than bring tea. The thought of Finn spending another winter in doorways or in the cold corners of the station was unbearable. But he also knew he couldn't just swoop in and try to fix things. Finn was a person, not a project. He had autonomy. He had survived a long time on his own terms. He started by talking to the security guard, a man named Carl. Carl had worked the station for 15 years. "Finn?" Carl said, leaning against his booth. "Yeah, been around maybe 8, 9 years. Quiet, never any trouble. People leave him alone. He leaves them alone. He's part of the place. We keep an eye out, you know. Make sure the real troublemakers don't bother him. He's harmless. More than can be said for most. Does he ever go to a shelter?" Leo asked. Carl shook his head. "Won't go near him. Says they're too loud, too much. Chaos. The chaos out here," Carl gestured to the bustling station. "He can understand. The chaos in there. It's a different kind. It gets to him?" Leo understood. The controlled chaos of the station was Finn's buffer. The unpredictable chaos of a crowded shelter was a trigger. He did some research. He called social service numbers, feeling awkward and out of his depth. He learned about something called supportive housing, small apartments with social workers who checked in, designed for people who needed stability, but also space and independence. It sounded right, but it also sounded impossible. There were waiting lists years long. He mentioned none of this to Finn. Their talks stayed in the safe territory of music. They talked about composers, about different pianos they'd played, about the feeling of a perfectly voiced chord. In these conversations, Finn was transformed. His eyes lost their cloudy, distant look. He spoke with a sharp, penetrating intelligence. He was, in these moments, not a homeless man, but a fellow artist. One bitterly cold Thursday, Finn wasn't at the piano. Leo waited, the tea going cold in his hand. A sense of dread crept over him. He walked around the station, checking the usual benches. He finally saw him, sitting in a dim corner near the baggage claim, shivering. He wasn't wearing his coat. Finn? Leo approached slowly. "Are you all right? Where's your coat?" Finn looked up. His eyes were frightened. A man? He needed it more. He was cold. I gave it to him. He was hugging himself, his whole body trembling. Leo felt a surge of panic. Giving away your coat in this weather was dangerous. It was an act of profound compassion, or a sign that Finn's connection to reality was slipping. Probably both. Without a word, Leo took off his own heavy winter jacket and draped it over Finn's shoulders. "Here, you can't freeze." Finn looked up at him, confused. "But you—" "I'm going straight home on a warm train," Leo said, though he was already feeling the bite of the station's drafty air. "Please, keep it for now." That was the breaking point. The next day, Leo didn't go to the station. He went to the office of a local mental health outreach charity he'd found online. He talked to a woman named Anya, a social worker with a calm, patient face. He told her everything. About the piano, about Curtis, about the diagnosis, about the coat. He felt like he was betraying Finn's trust, but he felt he had no choice. Anya listened intently. "You've given him something very important," she said. "Trust and consistency. Those are rare gifts for someone in his situation." She explained the system was slow and flawed, but not hopeless. With a verified diagnosis and a history like Finn's, he might qualify for certain programs. "The first step," she said, "is to see if he'll talk to me. Not to force anything, just to talk. Can you introduce us?" Leo agreed, his heart in his throat. He felt like he was setting a trap for a wild, fragile animal. The following Tuesday, Anya came with him. She dressed in plain clothes, no official-looking badge. She carried a backpack, not a briefcase. She understood the need not to scare him off. Finn was at the piano, playing something light and almost cheerful. When he saw Leo with a stranger, his hand stopped immediately. The shutters came down over his eyes. "Finn," Leo said gently, staying back. "This is my friend Anya. She's a social worker. She helps musicians sometimes with finding quiet places to practice. I thought maybe you could talk to her." Finn looked from Leo to Anya, suspicion etched on his face. "I have a place to practice," he said, gesturing to the blue piano. "I know," Anya said, her voice soft and respectful. "And it's a good place." "I can hear that. Leo told me you studied at Curtis." "That's incredible. I work with an arts foundation. Sometimes we help find housing that has a piano. Quieter than this. A room of your own." The phrase, "a room of your own," seemed to hang in the air. Finn stared at her. The suspicion was still there, but underneath, a flicker of something else. A deep, weary longing. "A room," he repeated. Yes, Anya said. An apartment. Small. Your own key. And there's a community room in the building with a piano. It's not a shelter. It's just a home. Finn was silent for a long time. The station noise swirled around them. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. I don't do well with rules. Or with many people. The only rules are to be safe and respect your neighbors, Anya said. There are very few people. A social worker would visit once a week, just to say hello and see if you need anything. That's all. You could come and go as you please. He looked at Leo. You think this is real? Leo nodded, his throat tight. I've met with her. I've seen the paperwork. It's real, Finn. It's a chance. Finn looked down at the piano keys, his long fingers hovering over them. He played a single minor chord. It sounded like a question. I would still be able to come here? He asked. To play this one? Whenever you want, Leo said. Finn took a deep, shaky breath. He looked at Anya. I will talk to you. Once we can talk. It wasn't a yes, but it was a door, cracked open. Anya just smiled and nodded. That's perfect. We can just talk. The process was slow. There were forms, doctor's visits to confirm his old diagnosis, interviews. Finn hated it. He missed days. He got confused and scared. Leo and Anya became a team, gently coaxing, explaining, driving him to appointments, always bringing it back to the music, to the promise of a quiet room with a lock on the door. After 3 long months, the day came. Anya handed Finn a key. It was for a small studio apartment in a modest, quiet building on the city's edge. It had a window, a bed, a small kitchenette, and a lock. The building's community room, she showed him, had an old but well-tuned upright piano. Finn stood in the empty apartment, holding the key so tightly it must have hurt his palm. He didn't say anything. He just walked to the window and looked out at the street below, his shoulders beginning to shake silently. He was crying. Leo waited by the door, giving him space. This wasn't a happy ending. It was a fragile beginning. It was a single, steady note held in a world of noise. For the first time in perhaps decades, Finn had a place where the only chaos was the chaos he brought with him. And maybe, just maybe, in the quiet, he could start to sort through the beautiful, broken pieces of his music and begin to put them back together. The apartment was a shell, but it was Finn's shell. For the first few weeks, he barely left it. Leo would visit, bringing groceries, and often find him sitting in the middle of the empty floor or standing at the window, just watching the world go by from behind the safety of glass. The quiet seemed to roar in his ears. He was jumpy, unused to the absence of echoing footsteps and rumbling trains. He didn't touch the piano in the community room. It's too quiet in there, he told Leo one afternoon, his voice tense. The silence is expectant. It feels like it's waiting for a mistake. The station's piano forgave mistakes, swallowed them in its own noise. A silent room amplified every one. Leo understood. He didn't push. He just kept visiting, sitting with Finn in the quiet, talking about small things or saying nothing at all. The trust they had built at the blue piano was now the foundation of this new, fragile life. The change started slowly. Finn asked for a small, second-hand radio. He tuned it to a classical station, letting the music of others fill the silent space of his apartment. It was a bridge. Then he asked Leo for manuscript paper. Not to compose, he said, but just to see the lines again. Leo brought him a thick, beautiful book of blank staves. For days, it sat on Finn's small table, untouched. Then, one morning, Leo found him hunched over it, a pencil in his hand. He wasn't writing notes, not yet. He was drawing long, slow, curving lines across the bars, like mapping the flow of a river. "It's the sound of the trains," Finn murmured, without looking up. "The rhythm. The Doppler effect as they approach and leave. It's a kind of music, too." He was translating the chaos of his old world into the language of his art. It was the first sign of healing, of integration. Weeks turned into a month. Then, on a sunny spring afternoon, Leo got a call from Anya, the social worker. "He played," she said, her voice warm with relief, "in the community room. For 10 minutes. I was doing paperwork down the hall. It was just scales. But it was steady. That was the crack in the dam." Finn began to visit the community room piano for a few minutes each day. At first, it was only when he was sure no one else was around. He played exercises, fragments, the musical equivalent of stretching stiff, atrophied muscles. The piano, while not perfect, was infinitely better than the station's blue wreck. The sound was clear and true in the quiet room. It asked for precision, and slowly, painfully, Finn began to answer. Leo continued his Tuesday and Thursday visits, but now they sometimes included a walk to the community room. He would sit in a chair by the door while Finn played. The music was different now. It was less like a cry torn from the soul and more like a conversation. There were pauses. There were repetitions. He would work on a phrase over and over, shaping it, listening to its resonance in the still air. One day, Finn played the opening of the Rachmaninoff prelude, the one that had stunned the station crowd. He stopped after the first powerful chords. "It feels different here," he said, staring at his hands. In the station, it was an explosion. Here, it's a statement. "I have to mean it differently." Leo just nodded. He was learning to listen in a new way himself. As the days grew longer and warmer, a change came over Finn. The perpetual chill seemed to leave his bones. He started keeping his apartment clean. He planted a small pot of herbs on his windowsill. The hollows in his cheeks began to fill out. The medicine, which he now took consistently with Anya's gentle supervision, kept the terrifying noise at bay without completely silencing his inner music. He found a balance, a precarious but holding peace. One evening in early summer, Leo arrived for a visit. Finn was waiting for him, dressed in a clean, simple button-down shirt Leo had bought him weeks before. It was still crisp, clearly never worn. "I have something to show you," Finn said, and there was a new light in his eyes. Not the fire of genius, but the steady glow of purpose. He led Leo not to his apartment, but to the community room. The piano lid was fully open. On the piano bench was a neat stack of the manuscript paper, now filled with dense, inscrutable notations. "I've been writing," Finn said simply. "It's not finished. It may never be finished. But it's a piece. My piece. It's for the station. And for the quiet, and for the help." He sat down. He placed the pages on the music stand. His hands, now clean and cared for, rested on his knees for a moment, the old familiar prelude to playing. He took a deep, centering breath, and began. It started with a low, rumbling tremor in the left hand, an unmistakable evocation of a distant train. The right hand entered with a single, high, pure note, like the first star seen from a dark platform. Then the music began to flow, weaving together all the threads of Finn's life. There were passages of stormy, dissonant struggle that made Leo's heart clench, remembering the jarring crashes at the station. These dissolved into passages of breathtaking, lyrical beauty, the ghost of the Chopin he used to play. Then came a section of playful, syncopated jazz, a memory of freedom, before shifting into a solid, walking bass that spoke of resilience, of putting one foot in front of the other. It was not a sad piece. It was a whole piece. It contained sorrow, but also wonder, chaos, and a hard-won peace. It was the sound of a life being reassembled. It lasted about 12 minutes. When the final chord resolved a complex, questioning chord that didn't fully close, but hung in the air full of light and possibility, Finn let his hands fall into his lap. The silence in the room was profound. It was the good kind of silence, full of the echo of what had just been. Leo found he had tears on his cheeks. He didn't bother wiping them away. "Finn," he whispered, That's a masterpiece." Finn looked at the keys, a faint, true smile touching his lips. "It's just what was in here," he said, touching his chest. Finally all in one place. An idea, which had been forming in Leo's mind for weeks, suddenly solidified. "People should hear this," he said. "Not just me. Not in a train station. Properly." Finn flinched, the old fear flashing in his eyes. No stages. No crowds. "Not a crowd," Leo said quickly. "A room. A small room. With a good piano. Just a few people. Some friends of mine from the orchestra. Anya, Carl, the security guard. Maybe the lady from the newsstand. People who have been part of this. A private concert. For them." The word private seemed to calm him. He thought about it, his fingers tracing the edge of the manuscript. "For them," he repeated slowly. Leo reached out to his contacts. He explained the situation, simply and honestly, to a few close musician friends. He booked a small, intimate recital hall at a local music school for a Sunday afternoon. It held maybe 50 people. He invited Anya, Carl, the newsstand woman whose name was Betty, and a handful of others who represented the journey from the station to this moment. The day arrived. Finn, in his button-down shirt and a pair of dark trousers Leo had helped him pick out, stood in the wings of the little hall. He was trembling. Leo stood beside him. "You don't have to do this," Leo said. "Even now. We can just go home." Finn shook his head. He was looking at the small group of people finding their seats. He saw Carl, out of his uniform, looking awkward but proud in a suit. He saw Betty from the newsstand, wearing a bright yellow dress. He saw Anya, giving him a thumbs up. He saw Leo's friends, professional musicians, sitting with open, curious faces. "Not pity. They're not an audience," Finn said, as if realizing it for the first time. "They're witnesses." He walked onto the stage. The stage lights were gentle. He didn't bow. He simply sat at the beautiful, polished grand piano, adjusted the bench, and looked at his hands on the keys, just like he used to do at the station. He played his piece. "Station intermezzo," he called it. In the perfect acoustics of the hall, every note rang with crystal clarity. The train rumbles were deeper, the struggles more terrifying, the moments of beauty almost too painful to bear. He played not just from memory, but from his bones. It was the performance of his life, because it was his life. When the final, luminous chord faded, there was no immediate applause. The silence held for a long, reverent moment. Then Carl, the big security guard, started clapping, a slow, solid sound. The others joined, not a roaring ovation, but a warm, sustained, deeply respectful wave of sound. Finn looked out at them. He didn't smile broadly. He gave that small, sharp nod he used to give at the station. But his eyes were clear, and they met Leo's in the front row. In them was a thank you that went beyond words. It was the thank you for seeing a man, not a spectacle, for hearing the music and then helping the musician. After, there were quiet handshakes, cups of punch, murmured congratulations. Finn endured it quietly, but he didn't hide. He even thanked Betty for the newspaper she used to save for him. Walking home that evening, the summer air soft around them, Leo finally spoke what he felt. "You were magnificent." Finn walked beside him, comfortable in the silence between them. "It wasn't a joke," he said after a while, echoing the unspoken thought from so many months ago. "No," Leo said. "It never was." They walked on, not toward a train station, but toward an apartment, a quiet room, and the simple, extraordinary fact of a life reclaimed, one note at a time. The masterpiece wasn't just the music played on the stage. It was the man playing it, whole again, and finally home.